All right, Mike. So there's a thing that happens sometimes when you introduce somebody else to a given thing, and they eventually become so enthralled with it, they love it, and they learn a lot about it, and they eventually eclipse you in how far they are into using said thing. And I feel like that's where we are right now with you and fountain pens, because I have 4 fountain pens, 2 of which I use almost daily. I use a single ink, which is a Noodler's black ink. But holy buckets, dude, you're sending me pictures and stuff of new pens you're buying and the inks you're using. It's like, how many pens and inks do you got going over there now?
There's a fair amount. So the challenge last time was, would I buy the fancy bottle that you had mentioned for my Twisby?
Right. And did you?
I did not.
Okay.
Instead, I bought a Sailor 1911 Fresca and a bottle of Yomogi Manyo Sailor ink, which is amazing, way more expensive. So here's the story with this. I started listening to The Pen Addict, which was definitely
a mistake.
Yeah, from an economic perspective, a mistake. And Brad and Mike were talking about some of their favorite pens, what's on their desk, and they're going through all of these different crazy special edition pens. And I'm like, man, someday I'd love to have a Sailor, because Mike's got like 5 Sailors on his desk. And then I went and checked the Anderson Pens website, which next time you're in town, we'll have to stop by there, because it's about 100 feet from the co-working space that I go to.
Sure.
And they had an experienced Sailor 1911. So it was cheaper than the standard one. There's no sign of wear on this at all. And when I saw it, I'm like, I'm probably not going to find a better deal than that. So I bit the bullet and I bought myself a fancy fountain pen, a truly fancy fountain pen.
Like crazy.
And, yeah, I love it. I'm using it all the time. I kind of knew that once I had like a really nice pen that I would end up using it more, but I think I've ended up using it more than even I thought I was going to. It just is so comfortable, writes so well. The ink looks awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I also purchased the Twisby Eco and filled it with the pink ink from the Twisby ink sampler that I got, and Rachel's using that one presently. And I have a Pilot Metropolitan on the way as well.
Oh, so you did go that route. See, that was one I told you to get, I think, right?
Yep. The plan is that one will be the everyday carry, stays in the backpack probably.
Got it. Beat on that one a little bit. Sure.
Yep.
Well, you've made me proud for sure. I guess the only other question I have at this point is, what notebooks are you using?
I am using solely a Baron Fig Confidant, the clear edition. So the James Clear one, it's got the black cover and the gold embossed triangle thing, just because I think it looks awesome.
Sure.
The Baron Fig paper I really like, but I don't know. There's lots of different versions of the Confidant. I would use any one of those. I do like the larger size. So this is not like the standard Moleskine size. It's a little bit bigger. It's basically the exact size of my 11-inch iPad Pro. So I can grab like the notebook, a pen, and my iPad and very comfortably carry it to coffee shop, whatever. So that's where all of the noodling happens, is inside that Baron Fig.
Well, I'm proud of you. Well done, sir. I only hope that now you don't cost me money in this endeavor. So
we'll just never use the Sailor and you'll be fine.
All right, I'll do my best. One thing I want to point out before we start running through action items and follow up there is that we're doing something at the end here of 2019 going into 2020, and Mike saw this happen in a couple other places, one in particular, and it kind of sparked something in us, so we thought we would try it, see how it goes. But it's top books of 2019. So what we would like to ask you to do is go to club.bookworm.fm. Pinned at the top of that list of topics, there's a poll, top books of 2019. Go into that and choose your favorite book of all the books we've covered for the year of 2019, which is a pretty difficult task, to be honest. I submitted my vote. Did you do this already, Mike? Did you put one in on this?
I did.
Okay. I don't know if I should ask what it is. We'll do that whenever we do the episode. But there's already votes on this. The cream of the crop is starting to come towards the top, and there's I had a hard time going through this list in order to choose the one that I was going to vote for because I had restricted it to one vote. I'm not sure if I should have done that or not, but it's what it is. And holy cow, this is hard to do. So anyway, go to club.bookworm.fm, click on that poll topic, submit your vote. You have until midnight on December 31st. So you have until the end of the year to get your vote in. Anything you want to add to that, Mike?
It's kind of cool looking through that list and realizing that we read a lot of books in 2019.
Yes.
That doesn't even include the gap books.
Right.
So there's actually quite a bit to pick from there. These are the books that we covered for Bookworm, by the way, in 2019, not the books that were published in 2019.
Yeah, that would be a long list. Holy cow.
That would be, yeah.
Fun times. So yes, club.bookworm.fm. How many times can I say it? Club.bookworm.fm. Go to the poll, submit your votes, and we'll go from there. So that said, action items, Mike, I have one that I need to go through because I did it last time, and that is this 2-minute morning practice. And I had one person ask me about this from the last time I said I only got it done halfway, like what exactly it is that I'm doing as part of that. Well, there's 3 different prompts that I'm attempting to go through on this. I'm still only about 75% of the time getting this done, but each day there's 3 things I'm answering. One is I will let go of blank. I am grateful for blank. I will focus on blank. Those are the 3 things that I'm doing as part of this 2-minute morning practice, and just trying to make that a part of my morning routine. It has been going into paper, no surprise there. And it ends up being part of like my daily journal for the day. So it ends up being how I start my day. And then at the end of the day, I'm using that same notebook and same location to do like my end of day journaling, which I don't really have any prompts for. I feel like I should. I don't know how many times people have told me I should use prompts for this, and I don't. So anyway, that's the one I got to follow up on from 2 episodes ago. You've got a couple here, Mike.
I do. And in typical Mike fashion, there's no way to tell if they were successful. So
good job.
How can I simplify my life in the form of a question? I haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about this, to be honest. Although I am about to walk into a period which is a simplification of my life, which is a 2-week sabbatical. So kind of am doing this, but there's definitely more room to make improvement in this area. One of the things that I've been thinking around this topic is just minimizing the number of things that I am involved in, the number of commitments that I have made. New projects pop up all the time, and I am feeling a lot better about saying no to them. And a lot of it is because of this question, how can I simplify my life? I know that my goal is to create simplicity. And so when I am presented with an opportunity for a project now, it's kind of my initial reaction, instead of being like, oh, that's interesting, I really want to do that, it's kind of like, ew, sure. I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
And I have to, so it's kind of flipped where instead of trying to talk myself out of doing it, now I kind of have to talk myself into doing it, which for me is kind of a baseline of progress that's being made. But like I said, I know that there's more stuff to be done here. So not completely done, but for terms of following up with action items, I'd say this is done. Second one I had was, am I interruptible? And this one, I do actually have a specific story that proves that I did actually do this one.
Okay, that's a step in the right direction.
So, yeah, I think it was 2 or 3 days after we recorded, somebody asked me for help moving a couch. And it was in the middle of my workday, and my initial reaction was, no, I'm not going to drop everything and help you move a couch. But then I instantly remembered this action item, and I'm like, well, let's figure out a way to make this work. And you know what? It all worked out. So I was, in fact, interruptible. But again, judging by my initial reactions, there's room for improvement here still. I need to seek out more opportunities to be interrupted, I think.
Which is so weird to hear someone say. I need to find ways to be interrupted more. Like,
yeah.
Okay, sure.
Well, nobody likes being interrupted. That's the thing. I'm also teaching a Bible college class right now on personal management, and the lesson that we just did was on attitude and discipline. And the word for discipline that they use in a couple different places literally means to hit under the eye. So you think about all of the Bible verses that talk about the benefits of discipline and choosing to be disciplined. It's like subjecting yourself to pain. It doesn't sound that enjoyable, but ultimately it produces a good result,
right?
Which for me is better relationships. So I know that being interrupted is going to drive the productivity nerd in me crazy, but that's probably a good thing.
And I think, and just to defend you and clarify, I think what you mean by this is interruptible by people, not necessarily interruptible by some media related thing.
I'm not looking for notifications to go off so I can be distracted by something. True.
Yes.
It's people who have something that they need my help with, and I want to, instead of just saying, no, I got my own stuff going on, being able to prioritize people over projects.
Right. So you're essentially making the distinction between being interrupted versus being distracted.
Yep. Definitely.
Between those two there. So people versus things. I like it. I've got 3 here from our last book, Margin. One is to get back into my daily yoga practice, which has failed about as bad as it could, in that I did it absolutely 0 times. I'm gonna try again though. That's the way this works. You just keep going. So I need to keep trying on that. That is definitely something I need to get back into. I also had simplifying my life on here, simple life. I don't have anything specific as far as success with this goes, but I've been having a lot of conversations about like my schedule. I know you and I talked a little bit about my schedule with working at a church after our last recording. What should my schedule look like? What does it look like when I'm at the church, when I'm at home, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of questions, a lot of details around that, but I am still working through that. I don't think there's a way to say yay or nay on this. I think you kind of alluded to that. But it is one that I am going to continue working on, but I don't think it's worth following up on again, per se. Last one here is to put some buffer time between my task blocks. So essentially giving me, that buffer zone between what I'm working on. And this has gone very poorly. Basically what I'm saying is Joe is really bad at putting margin into his life. And in my attempt to put more buffer between all of my tasks, I realized that over the last 2 weeks, I had 1 week of catch up from Thanksgiving. And then this past week, I've been hustling because we're going to be gone next week for Christmas. So the last 2 weeks have been the opposite of putting in buffer, if anything. So I had a lot of questions for Mike after our last episode. How long did we talk after we recorded last time, Mike? Maybe 20, 30 minutes, even after we were done?
Yeah, probably about 30 minutes.
Some of that was me quizzing Mike on the work scheduling of the Suite setup and how they do things with like this 2-week sabbatical that's coming up and such. And it's like, is that a routine I could start to adopt? I would love to. No idea if that'll work. Doesn't make sense to start that routine on a sabbatical. That would be kind of odd. Maybe it would make sense. But that way of thinking is something I'm trying to work towards. So this whole simple life and buffer between task blocks, the whole yoga practice, like it's all intertwined. So much of this really is. But no conclusive answers, but I'll keep working on them. That's what I got.
All right. Cool. So that's it for follow-up.
Yep.
Tell us about today's book.
Today's book was not my choice, but it was my choice. This was selected from a game I played where club members, first one to send me a private message on the book they wanted us to cover. No questions asked, we would cover the book. Mike didn't like that concept, but it turned out okay, I think, Mike.
Did.
And Awful Otter on the club chose The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. So that is today's book. So we picked it up. We have read it. It's time to go through it. But I did enjoy this one. And we'll get into what is The Infinite Game here shortly. But I'm grateful that we had the chance to go through this one. But what were your first impressions on this, Mike?
This was an awesome book. I forgot how much I liked Simon Sinek.
Yeah. Yeah.
No 3 different sections, just 11 different chapters.
Right.
And everything flowed together super tightly. There were a lot of stories in here that I feel like I've heard before. One thing that instantly came to mind was, oh yeah, Simon Sinek really likes Apple from a business organization perspective.
Yes.
But there's a lot of other stories in here too. So
yeah, there's lots of Apple culture, Steve Jobs, Apple retail stores, Apple. Microsoft messed up, but Apple. Like there's
yeah,
there's a lot of that. Let me just read off all the chapter titles here because there are 11, and we're not going to go through all of them. I think we have 7 written down here to kind of go through, and we may pull some stuff from the other pieces here. But chapter 1 through 11, Finite and Infinite Games, Just Cause, Cause, No Cause, Keeper of the Cause, The Responsibility of Business Revised, Will and Resources, Trusting Teams, Ethical Fading, Worthy Rival, Existential Flexibility, and The Courage to Lead. And the first of those is Finite and Infinite Games. And this is where he really lays out what is the point of this book, I think. And his point here is that, number one, this shouldn't be a book that needs to be written, and yet it needed to be written. But 2, a finite game is one that has an end. It's one that once you've reached the end of it, you know if you've won or lost. And an infinite game is one that never stops, as the name implies. So what has to happen is whenever you're playing that game, you have to think about it very differently because you're essentially empowering the people after you to continue living out the values and the methods that you have put in place yourself as part of playing that game. So your methodologies and the systems and the lifestyles you put in place between those 2 different thought processes is drastically different. And the whole book is just littered with examples of how this has come about. I think the one thing I want to point out here, though, is that he keeps it very focused on business, which is kind of Simon Sinek's MO here. So he's very much focused on companies, businesses, and how the world of economics operates. It's not really one that he gears towards like a personal life. You could definitely do that, and you can pull out those parallels, but it's not something that he focuses on, I think, at all. I don't remember him calling that out in any way whatsoever. But anyway, finite and infinite games.
Yeah. So what is the difference between a finite and an infinite game?
Well, one you can win, the other you can't. That's the simple answer.
Right. Yeah, no, that is the simple answer. He's got a bunch of other points where I thought this was really an interesting way to start the book, because we probably, if we're honest with ourselves, tend to default towards a finite mindset. So I'll just quickly go through how he defines a finite. Characteristics of a finite game are played by known players. There's an agreed upon objective that when reached ends the game. Players wear uniforms and are easily identifiable. A set of rules and referees is in place to enforce those rules, and the game ends when the time is up and the players live to play another day. Now, an infinite game is kind of the exact opposite. It's played by known and unknown players. There's no agreed upon rules. There's sometimes conventions, but players can break them if they want to. There's no finish line, infinite time horizons, kind of your point. There's no such thing as winning, and it's the game that lives on and the players that run out, which I thought that play on words it kind of encapsulates this idea perfectly. So you think about, your life and the 70, 80 years that you're here, and time goes on before and after, and you're trying to leave the biggest legacy that you can. At least a lot of people, like that's their goal. And so that's an infinite mindset, is what can I create that's going to last, rather than the finite one is the short term, nearsighted, how can I make the most of this tomorrow sort of a thing. Which he unpacks that from a business perspective as we get into the other chapters. But this is definitely something worth defining here at the beginning. Some examples of this, because he talks about how business is an infinite game, and this is where you start to see the pro-Apple bias. I don't think this is 100% true anymore, but when he was writing this, he was talking about Steve Ballmer, correct?
Right.
And their release of the Zune, and they were the Zune HD, and their goal was they were going to kill the iPod. They were going to beat Apple. And he said that he spoke at a Microsoft event and he got one of these Zune HDs, and it was a really impressive product. So Microsoft's strategy was beat Apple, but Apple's strategy was bigger. They had an infinite mindset. Their goal was to help teachers teach and help students learn. And I don't remember who he said was championing that specific finite story or infinite story at the time, but he did mention that he was in a cab with an Apple executive and he told him what Microsoft had said, and was like, hey, the Zune HD is way better than the iPod. And the Apple executive is like, I'm sure it is. Like didn't faze him at all. And I thought that was a cool story, and it showed the difference between a finite mindset and infinite mindset really well.
Yeah, because it really does take two of like the conglomerates in the tech world. Like they're definitely against each other, and yet one's really not paying attention to the other, and the other one's hyper focused on their competitor in this story, which did not work out well for Microsoft in the end, as we all know. But yeah, as he goes through these two different mindsets, he does call out 5 essential practices if you're going to adopt an infinite mindset. We'll talk about some of these, maybe most of these.
Maybe all of them. We'll see.
Yeah, probably all of them. Time it's all said and done. There's really only one that's not on our list right now, so might just mention it because. But so the 5 essential practices are to advance a just cause, build trusting teams, study your worthy rivals, prepare for existential flexibility, and demonstrate the courage to lead. And you can see the parallels with some of his chapter titles here: Just Cause, Trusting Teams, Worthy Rivals, Courage to Lead. So let's just dive into the first of those, which is the Just Cause. And the reason I say that is because this is where a lot of the core starts to begin, because he does say that your just cause has to be something more than dollars, and it has to be something that you can't achieve. So it can't be a goal. I don't know how many times we talk about, setting goals and making sure they're achievable and such. That's not what we're talking about here. This is bigger than that. Yes, you can have those goals and you can have those short-term trajectories that you're trying to put together, but this is bigger than that. And, he of course gives a lot of examples like the one you just shared with Apple and Microsoft. Apple was focused on delivering excellent technology and trying to share music, making music available to everyone, thus the iPod. But Microsoft was focused on winning the MP3 player game.
Yeah.
Like those are two different ways of coming at it. And you can kind of see that still today, in that Apple is now running Apple Music, and they are still fighting to make sure that music is available to all people. And, that's kind of ingrained in their culture, that concept, which is probably where some of their service mentality is now coming out, at least partially, not to get into Apple finances at all.
There's lots of other podcasts for that.
Yeah, I could rattle off 5 or 6 just off the top of my head, and I'm sure there's way more than that. But that is the core principle there in putting together. What is that long-term goal? Is it trying to solve the fight against AIDS? That wouldn't necessarily be a just cause because you're focused on, one, what happens if you find the cure for AIDS. Like, well, now you've succeeded in that. So that wouldn't necessarily be a just cause because you can achieve that. So if you get the point there, like the goal is to determine what it is your company is shooting for in the long term that you will continue to work towards. Even if, all of the cultural circumstances change, you will continue fighting and adapting to achieve that mission.
Yeah. So you in that passage right there, I think you said the word goal like 5 times, and it occurs to me that goals are finite minded because they are by definition a game that has a clear ending. And I've kind of been brewing on this lately, but as you were just talking, it kind of achieves the moment of clarity here where goals are finite minded, but habits maybe are an infinite minded version of that. So habits are the things that you're going to do every day going forward, and you don't even care that you'll probably be doing them the rest of your life. Whereas goals have a specific ending, like I'm going to run this half marathon. And I had this experience. I got done running the half marathon. I'm like, okay, now what? That was cool, but that was a year of my life. Now, what's next? So as I'm going through and reading this and talking through this with you, I'm recognizing more and more that goals are dumb. I understand in a lot of contexts, maybe they're necessary, but I find myself every time people are talking about goals now kind of pushing back on the concept a little bit. And especially after reading this book, that feeling is kind of multiplied. And I don't know if that's completely justified, but my initial reaction as we're talking about goals and getting into like the just cause and stuff is that goals are not the default way that we should be thinking about how we want to live our lives. The just cause is the thing that kind of provides the motivation. The definition he has is it's a specific vision of a future state that doesn't exist. It's a future state so appealing that people are willing to make sacrifices in order to help advance toward that vision. And he's again talking about this from a business perspective and rallying people behind your just cause. But I think even on a personal level, you could identify a just cause, and that's the thing that makes you show up every day. It's not the fact that you're checking a box and I am now 37% complete towards my goal of writing a book or whatever. And it kind of challenges me because I've kind of defaulted to that way in the past, and I want to kind of change that. And I've kind of been thinking about this for a while anyways, about habits and habits over goals and that kind of thing. But as I was reading this section, the action item associated with this for me is to identify what is my just cause. I've got my life theme, which is a version of this, I think, but I want to condense that down. Have you given any thought to this just cause and how it applies to you?
Yeah, to some degree. I know that like the Sweet Setup just has the planner and the plan your year thing that they've recently come out. I'm sure you're well aware of that, Mike. And I've tried to. I haven't jumped into that, but what it prompted whenever I saw that a lot of this came out is that's what really kicked off some of my thinking around, okay, what does 2020 look like? 2020, people, there's I think an especially large number of folks interested in putting together goals and plans for 2020 just because of the weird coincidence of 2020 vision. Like there seems to be a weird connecting thing there.
Yeah.
Even folks that I've talked to, they're like, oh yeah, I'm never setting plans and goals. I had conversations with our small group last night with folks that are very much anti goal orientation. And they're like, yeah, I'm thinking about setting some goals this year. Like, why are you doing that? You've been against these things for years, almost a decade. Like, well, it just seems right with it being 2020. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So
well, I'm not sure plans and goals are necessarily the same.
No.
They can be.
No.
But I am all for planning. I'm not all for setting goals, just
Correct.
to
Yeah.
clarify.
I'm with you. I think what I've been, and if you've gone through my Working with OmniFocus course and listened to some of the stuff I've talked about recently, you're aware that a lot of what I've done with my task management systems is they're built around the development of habits. They're not necessarily goal oriented. There's not necessarily a thing that I'm shooting for that's going to end in 3 months. I have some of those thought processes that I kind of work towards, but they're not locked in stone. And I'm more geared towards trying to build the habits on a daily and weekly basis than anything, and then step back and make sure that those are shooting me towards the mission that I want to shoot towards. So I've thought about it in that sense, but part of the reason I brought up the suite setup piece was just because that is what prompted some of this thinking. And then when we're going through this particular section, my mind immediately started to trying to translate it into how does this apply to me personally. And this is again what I was mentioning earlier in how like I'm trying to do this simplification process, and do I try to put myself on a rhythm of work and then having some time to stop, take a step back and reflect on it. That whole habit mentality is, I think, similar to this just cause mentality, in that you're trying to build an infinite process. You're not trying to achieve a thing on a short term. And of course, being the end of the year, there's a lot of people talking about setting up goals and, do SMART goals and make sure you got your review for the year completed. It's like, well, review could be a good thing, but in most cases, people are taking that review and then setting up their annual goals for the next year. I don't really buy into that because life moves too fast. At least for me, it does. I know there are some people that it works out great, but holy buckets, if I set up goals for end of year 2020, I guarantee you before January's half over, I've got them changed. Like, it's just not going to work. So I think I'm with you. I haven't done formal goals in a long time. Our church is interested in having us set up goals for the year. And my first response to that was, can I set up goals for the next 7 weeks? That was my initial response.
Yeah.
And my boss kind of looked at me. He's like, well, yeah, I suppose that might work. So, we're small enough still. We can have everybody operating on different schedules and it's okay. So kind of weird, but that's, I don't know. All of this to say, I've had a lot of thoughts about it. I don't like goals. I think I'm with you in that sense, but I do want to try to put up the routines and put together some kind of a plan for the year. Maybe not quite the year, but at least a routine to work towards.
So just real quickly, he has some characteristics of a just cause, which I think would be helpful. So a just cause must be for something. It's got to be affirmative and optimistic. It must be inclusive, so it's open to all those who would like to contribute. It must be service-oriented for the primary benefit of others. That's the one that really jumps out to me. Talking about some of my follow-up action items from last time, being interruptible, prioritizing people over my own stuff. A just cause must be resilient, so able to endure political, technological, and cultural change, and it must be idealistic, big, bold, and ultimately unachievable. So I've been thinking about this, and again, I don't have this nailed down, which is why it's an action item. But just to bring some clarity maybe for people who are listening, I think that the just cause lands somewhere between the phrase that I've mentioned my wife and I landed on from going through the Life in Air book, where there was one thing in particular that really jumped out to me as we were going through those exercises, and that was we want to make people feel like $1 million even if we don't have $1 million. I don't think that's a just cause, but I also don't think my life theme is either, which is, for sake of transparency here, it's to help people answer the question, why am I here? By inspiring, encouraging, and teaching them to connect to their calling, discover their destiny, live a life they were created for. So I think my just cause is probably a simple one-sentence thing somewhere between those two. And I want to, by next time, spend some time thinking about that. I'm hoping that I will have something that is clear and concise that I can share next time that we record. But I have a feeling this is going to take a little bit of effort. I don't think a just cause is something that you just stumble onto and then you're like, oh, yeah, that's the thing. I think this maybe needs to be discovered, and there's different levels of nuance along the way. But I totally see the value in this. And I think that a just cause personally ultimately translates into a just cause for my family. I've mentioned we've got like the family core values, but I'd love to get that down into a single sentence for our just cause and ultimately have that apply to everything that we do.
How specific do you feel like that needs to be? And here's why I asked that question. My wife and I have looked at and adopted to some degree the mission of our church as our own personal, I might call it a just cause. And that is to glorify God by being a disciple who makes disciples of Jesus Christ. Like that's the mission statement there. And to me, that is a difficult thing to work towards, but at the same time, like I love working with technology. I love working with books. I like the whole analog space. I've got this thing for privacy and data ownership and such. Like I've got a lot of those things that I'm interested in, but none of those come out in that statement. And I haven't figured out if that's okay.
Yeah.
To me, like me personally, like some people will throw a fit. Some people will say, oh, it's perfectly fine. Like it's hard for me to say I should trust any one or multiple people on that. It has more to do with, is that okay for me or not? But so that's why I'm asking, like in your case, do you feel like that should be more specific or can it be more broad in that form?
Depends. And
Thanks,
I think it depends
Mike.
on you personally.
That helped
I think
none at all.
I think it's fine. I mean, he uses examples of like CVS helping people on their path to better health. It's hard to get more general than that. But also, he shares stories of how they were able to filter the decisions that they made based on that cause. And it was obvious that, and this is from chapter 11, so jumping all over the place, but in 2014, they decided to stop selling cigarettes in their stores because they recognized that this isn't in line with their cause. So what is the single sentence cause that allows you to instantly filter things and say, this is a heck yes, or this is a no? I think that's really the value of the just cause. But how specific you need to be, I think probably differs for the person or the organization. I guess for you personally, how specific do you think you need to be? Because I'll just telling on myself, I guess, if I left it more general, my tendency is going to be to look for the loopholes and the reasons not to do stuff. I need to get it very, very clear where there's no wiggle room in terms of how you're going to interpret this for me to really be motivated by it.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not you, you know?
Well, mine would be the other way around. Like, because it's so general, I feel like it makes it easy to say yes to a bunch of stuff. Oh, yeah, that kind of fits. I could say yes to that. That, I think, is potentially the fear that I have with it. So maybe you help me answer that question. Oh, dang it. Now I have more work to do.
Sorry.
All right.
I could point you to a fancy fountain pen, which will make that work more fun.
Oh, thanks, Mike. You're helping lots today. So now you're giving me more action items and you're costing me money. Okay. I see. I see how this is going to go.
Think of all the clarity that's going to come from it, though.
Yeah. You know, I can't help but sit down and write about it because I got the new fancy pen. It's like, okay. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. Thanks for that. All right. We better move on. So, determining what your just cause is, please do better at it than I have. And once you have done that, you have to have a keeper of the cause. And I thought this was interesting. It's why I put it in the outline. But he talks about cases where the original founder for a company who has that vision and has that just cause and is driving towards it. The keystone story here is about Sam Walton and wanting to deliver inexpensive products to the world. So essentially, he wanted to make all the products available at cheap prices. That was his goal, and was trying to make sure that it was done in a way that everybody was happy about it, and did exceptionally well at it. Thus, Walmart is like everywhere. And what happened was, oh shoot, am I gonna forget his name? The guy who succeeded him. All right, you're gonna listen to me flip pages. What was his name? Mike Duke. So Mike Duke took over from Sam Walton and had a different mindset. He didn't have that long-term vision of trying to deliver inexpensive products. He had the vision of trying to cut costs and to drive up shareholder value. And what happened? All kinds of bad stuff, from lawsuits and, public not wanting Walmart anymore, where they used to lobby to have a Walmart brought to their town. Now they were lobbying to keep them out. It just changed the whole trajectory of the company. And I think you can still see those ramifications yet today. So the keeper of that cause has to have the infinite mindset. Otherwise, they start to make the poor decisions that you don't want to see. He does bring up Apple again in this story. But, it's a process that you have to make sure that if you are the keeper of that just cause, that it does have to have ripple effects down through the company. You brought up CVS. That's a great example, because with that, they had to make decisions to, I believe it was like a $2 billion decision. Does that sound right? It seems like it was a very large number to CVS on how much they lost whenever they decided to stop selling cigarettes in their stores.
Yeah,
Well,
they were basically giving up the sales of roughly 700 packs of cigarettes per store per day. So it ended up being a ton of money.
yeah.
And when they did it, all the experts were like, I don't know what they're thinking. Their earnings per share is going to go way down. But then because they took a stand, it actually had a net positive effect, and they're way further than they would have been had they not taken that stance.
Yeah. I would say that this particular chapter, Keeper of the Cause, one of the things that really, that this one really drove home for me is just the terminology and being aware of, like, becoming aware of the way that some of the upper level management thinkers in these big companies, how are they operating? And just the words that they use, can you tell if they're short-sighted or long-sighted in the way that they're making their decisions? I haven't really noticed that previously, so whenever he was explaining and telling some of these stories, it really struck home that, yeah, this happens a lot, and the finite game is one that's played by a lot of people, more so than I ever really wanted to become aware of, but it's still, it's everywhere. It's ridiculous. Okay. Keeper of the cause. Are you the keeper of the cause? I'm a keeper of a cause.
Well, this is the interesting thing about this is you may not be the CEO of your organization. You can still be the keeper of a cause. I was talking to the guys in my discipleship group last night about the topic from Extreme Ownership, like decentralized command and like the chain of command in our church, but this applies to any organization as well, where you've got people who are communicating up and down, and ultimately you want everyone to be in alignment, everybody recognizing what is, from that book, they called it the commander's intent. So what is the vision for this organization? What are we working towards? What is our just cause? And you need everybody to buy into that and to work towards it from the top to the bottom. But you can't have the person at the top personally communicate to every single person along the chain of command, especially as you get into hundreds and thousands, millions of people. There's no way you can do that. So you got to communicate the vision or the cause to the people below you. They've got to communicate it to the people below them. They've got to communicate it to the people below them. That's how a big organization or a big team is ultimately successful. I think if you've got a CEO who is infinite minded, that's great. And that's one of the things that struck me about these stories that they told, he gets into Wells Fargo later and all of the stuff that they did wrong. That wasn't just a CEO who all of a sudden changed the culture in all of those different branches. There were a lot of managers along the way who embraced that culture. And yeah, leadership starts at the top, but I don't think it's as simple as just get a new person at the top and then instantly everything becomes better. Trust has to be built over time. He talks about that in this book. So I don't know. It encourages, as I'm reading through this section, it encourages me to, for the food chains that I am at the top of, or the totem pole, whatever, I want to make sure I'm infinitely minded and I'm communicating that down to everybody below me. But if I find myself not at the top of the food chain, then it's my responsibility still to connect infinitely to whatever vision is being passed down. I don't want to just go along with things because, oh, this is the way that we do things. Look for ways that I can improve things. Look for ways that I can build trust in the circle of safety and all that type of stuff with the people that are around me, regardless of whether my CEO has said, this is the way we're going to do things. I feel like if you were to take that approach, that's probably a recipe for promotion. I think that if you can lead people well, which to be a good leader, that's kind of the unwritten thing he's saying here, is like, if you're going to be a good leader, you need to be infinitely minded. I don't know that he explicitly says that at any point. He uses a lot of stories, though, of like finite-minded leaders and how they failed. So the narrative is like, if you're really going to be good at this, you got to be infinitely minded. And I feel like that kind of will develop your leadership abilities to the point where maybe you are. If you're not in charge of a large team now, you might be in the future. If that's something that you want or aspire to, then the way to do that is to start where you are with what you've got and apply that infinite mindset the best you can.
I think the important thing is that we're all the keeper of a cause in some form. And, if you're a dad or a mom, that's an easy one. I was recently introduced to this will be a good segue into the next section. I was recently introduced to the concept of thinking about families as a team and how, think about a baseball team. You got a coach who leads that team and they're running drills, they're doing practice, they're, learning how to play the game. And then they have their competition. They play the game, they win or they lose, but then they come back and they try again for the next time. And, they maybe get to the end championship, but then they come back again next year. And it's just a repetitive, like it's an infinitely recurring cycle. Translate that to your family. And, I see myself as the coach for my family team. And it's my job to run drills with our kids and teach them how things work in life. Show them simple things like math, or how, when you walk into an ice cream shop, what should you expect? What's the expectation of the owner of that shop on how you should interact with them? Soft skills in that sense. Like those are the drills that we're running. And then later on, they will have chances to do those on their own, but then you can review those, go through it with them, and then continue to help them become better humans, following the cause that you're working towards. And this gets into the next section, trusting teams. But that mindset behind thinking of your family as a team, and if you go into this next section of trusting teams, you have to have that team working together so that they can reach that long-term infinite cause that just cause that you're working towards. And that's done by continuing to work through difficult things together, whether it applies to the just cause or not, but learning how to help each other through a lot of those instances and sharing how you're feeling about it. If you've got things you're struggling with, asking others in that team to help you with it, et cetera, et cetera. You get the point.
Yeah.
So you really have to have that whole team working really well in order to, succeed in working towards your just cause. And I do like the idea of thinking of my family as that team. There's obviously other areas that I am the leader of as well, sound teams and video teams at our church. Like I am the keeper of the cause in those areas as well. And I can continue to build those teams in those scenarios in the same way. But frankly, I like the family thing.
Yeah. Well, before even trusting teams, he kind of touches on this topic a little bit in Will and Resources, because he talks about how in any game there are two resources that people need to play: will, which is intangible, harder to measure, and then resources, which are tangible and easy to measure. And he makes the point that every leader has a bias. And the things that you were talking about, the soft skills and the things like that, as you are leading your family, that shows your bias towards the will, not the resources, which, like, the money is the easy one. You know, how much do we have in the bank account? The things that you can measure like that. Going back to the Walmart thing, we can see this in the statement that Mike Duke made when he took over. He says, "I'm confident we will continue to deliver value to our shareholders, increase opportunity for our over 2 million associates, and help our 180 million customers around the world save money and live better." And he makes the point from that quote that those are in the wrong order. It's shareholders, associates, customers. But Sam Walton's just cause, the team that he was leading, his just cause that he was trying to communicate was lower the cost of living for everyone. So the customer is first. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, getting into the trusting teams section, there's a story here about Alan Mulally and how he kind of changed the culture at Ford when he took over as the new CEO. He was the CEO of Boeing prior to that. And so talking about this from a corporate perspective, I liked this story because I actually heard Alan Mulally speak when I was at EntreLeadership. When he spoke, it was an interesting presentation because he made this slide, put it up on the wall, and he basically was like, "These are the 13 things, everything I know about leadership." And then he proceeded to talk about the 13 things that are on that slide. And it's not complicated. It's simple stuff. But it is kind of to your point about leading your family well, the things that he did, how he kind of set the tone and dictated the direction that they were going to go. So when he took over, and he talks about this in this book, Simon Sinek does, that the executives were asked to report on their business plans, and they were to assign it green, yellow, or red based on how well it was doing. And time after time, he has these meetings with people who are in charge of these projects, and all of these things are coming back green. And he's getting frustrated because he's like, "Guys, these are not all green. We're about to lose many billions of dollars this year. Something is broken. Let's figure out what it is." And it was hard for him to create the circle of safety that Simon Sinek talks about in this book, where people would admit that they're struggling with something. And immediately when somebody shared something for the first time, like, he praised them in front of everybody. Everybody that was there kind of thought they were going to be humiliated, berated, or they were going to get fired. That's what the previous CEO did. But he wanted to set an example of, no, I want to know what's not going well. And he uses this phrase, like, "You have a problem, but you are not the problem." And I have an action item associated with this too. Now, I want to create that circle of safety inside of my family as well. I want it because he mentions that it's necessary for trust to exist. So how do you do that? How do I create a circle of safety for my kids? That's kind of my action item here, because he talks about this in this chapter, how a leader cannot force anybody into the circle of safety. This really challenged me. He mentions that trust is built over time. You cannot tell somebody, "Oh, just trust me." That doesn't work that way. He's even got this cool little chart. Well, I guess it's not a chart, but there's two axes. There's performance on the y-axis, and then there's trust on the low axis. And he talks about how the Navy SEALs try to find, obviously, people who are high performance have high trust. The people that are toxic for them are the people who are high performers, but they have low trust. Because if you have high performance, you can tend to rely on your own abilities, but you're not going to win every battle. And when it starts going south, do you have the character? Do you have the trust necessary there for people to admit that things are going wrong so you can fix them? Or do they just try to they try to just gloss over it, and that kind of gets into like the ethical fading stuff, which we'll get to in a bit. But you don't want people who are going to compromise the standard in order to cover their butts. You want people who are ultimately going to prioritize trust first, and that does start at the top. And again, that's something that spoke to me as I was going through this too about my family. Is I've got to take the first step. I have to set the tone. I have to become vulnerable myself. I have to admit my mistakes. I have to talk about all the times that I've messed up. And an insecure, finite-minded leader would say, well, I can't possibly tell my kids the times that I've messed up, because then they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to respect what I have to say. But actually, the opposite is true. When you do that kind of stuff, they do respect you because they see the things that you're doing wrong. They see your flaws. And if you just pretend like they don't exist, then eventually the what they start to believe is, well, I guess dad's just a hypocrite. And I don't want that.
I don't think anybody does want that. This is a challenging thing to think about whenever you start applying it to your family, because so much of it comes back to how you live. It's not necessarily about what you say or what you decide. It's like, what do you actually act on? Yes, I can say that I like to do my morning routine, and I tell my kids, yeah, I read my books every morning, and I read my Bible every morning, and I pray every morning. But if they don't ever see you do any of that, it gets hard for them to know if it's actually happening or not. They might be able to pick it up. They might be able to nail down if you actually are or not. But they have to see the action that corresponds to the words, or just the action. So I do think that, if you determine what that just cause is, and you create that safety zone and make sure that you're not going to have any gotchas in there. It's like, yeah, I'm going to create this zone for you to share. And then depending on what you say, I'm either going to, make it easier for you, or I'm just going to use it against you. And if you do the latter of those two, bad things happen, and you've just completely trashed your safety zone in that sense. So it doesn't end up well.
Yeah. I would add to that, I think the most important thing is that you follow through on what you say you're doing.
Right.
If you say that I read my Bible and I pray every morning, then you better make sure that that is what you actually do. It can't be something that you confess is important, but then your life doesn't line up with it. It doesn't mean I'm going out of my way to, hey, kids, look, I'm actually doing it. But they can tell, I believe they can tell when you are saying something and you feel bad because you're not living it out, versus this is part of who I am, this is part of my identity, and there's a confidence behind the statement that is lacking otherwise. They can tell when you're faking it, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. And it's not just kids, I think. I think if you're leading a team or an organization, that they can sense it as well.
Absolutely. So in other words, don't be lazy. And I think that's probably a good place to jump into our next talking point here in ethical fading and lazy leadership.
Oh, nice segue.
I know, right? Because and you mentioned earlier, like the whole Wells Fargo thing, with how they had theoretically a good mission, but they didn't follow through on it in the long term. They lost sight of that. What was the number? 3.5 million fake accounts that were opened under Wells Fargo, and people were getting late fees, all kinds of stuff, all sorts of bad things were happening. There was just tons of corruption that came out of that. And it essentially comes back to, if you're not on point, if you are the keeper of the cause and you are the one setting the example, take your family again. If you are not the one following through and you're not actually doing the things you're telling your kids that you're doing, they catch that laziness, and people know if you're not going through with it. Thus, over time, that leads to what he termed ethical fading, where you slowly but surely start to lose that the course towards that just cause. And you start looking at the more short-sighted, the finite games that you end up playing. That's not good. All tons of examples where bad things come out of this. Wells Fargo is just one example. I'm sure you can think about how this has happened in your own life. I can think of times when I've slowly gotten worse and worse at procrastination over time, and it's led to bad conversations, and I've had to cancel a bunch of stuff that I really didn't want to cancel because I screwed up and got behind on things. Like, it just doesn't pan out. Don't do that. Don't be lazy. That's the moral of the story there.
Yeah, and it can happen to anybody. I didn't write down all of the corporate stories that he shares in this book in my MindNote file, but I did write down this Princeton University Good Samaritan study, which was really interesting. These are students who were in the divinity program, I believe, and so they're studying religion, and the Good Samaritan is a Bible story about this guy gets beat up, left on the side of the road, and then who is actually going to stop and help that person. So they had somebody who was in a lot of distress, and they put them strategically on the way to class for these students. And then they had a researcher that went with them. I don't know how they did this study without it making it seem like they're trying to manipulate me. Like, that would be my thought if I was participating in this study. Like, I know they're going to try to get me to do something I shouldn't be doing.
Yep. They're totally going to try to pin this on me.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly how they did it, but what they found was that with low pressure to get where they were going, 63% of the people stopped and helped the person. With medium pressure, 45 to just keep going to wherever they were supposed to be, 45% of people stopped, but with high pressure, only 10% of people stopped. And this is the group, like I said, that you would think 100% of these people would stop every single time, no questions asked. But you apply a little bit of pressure, and it's easy to shift your focus on your own stuff instead of the problems of people around you. This comes all the way back to the beginning of the episode and what I want to change in my life. So this is not something that you read about it and you say, well, yeah, the people who are running Wells Fargo, they're just complete jerks, and there's no way I would have done that if I was in that situation. It's a slippery slope. And it's common practice, he points out, to choose language that softens or obscures the impacts of our behavior. The words that we choose can distance us from any sense of responsibility, but they can also have the opposite effect as well. They can help us act more ethically if we choose them well. As I was reading this, I was thinking about the probably only TV show I've gotten into in the last 15 years, which is this Canadian comedy called Corner Gas. I'm not sure if I showed you this when you were here or not, but it's written by
I think this might be the first time I've ever heard of it.
Okay, so it's written by a stand-up comedian, think like Jerry Seinfeld. Okay, but it takes place in a small town in Canada. And so instead of Seinfeld, which is just like loud, obnoxious humor, it's kind of just really sarcastic. And there's this one scene in there where these two police officers are arguing, and one of them's like, "You lost the Clavette Cup?" The other one's like, "I didn't lose it. I'm just unable to ascertain its whereabouts." The other one's like, "Don't try police mumbo jumbo on me. I taught it to you." That's immediately what I thought of when I read this section.
All right.
And that's obviously like a funny example, but it did challenge me to think about how I do this. How am I lazy in my leadership, and how do I default towards this ethical fading? And I don't have anything specific that came to mind, but this whole section on lazy leadership really stood out to me because there's a couple things he points out in this that kind of lead to this ethical fading. So the first thing he says is that lazy leadership chooses to put processes in place to fix problems rather than building support for their people. I definitely am guilty of this, where we think about something that went wrong and then, okay, well, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? I recognize after reading this book that that's a finite-minded way to solve that problem. A more infinite-minded approach would be, okay, what is the job that this team or these people are trying to do, and asking them, how can I support you? That's kind of the story that he tells about the barista who worked at the Four Seasons. And it was kind of interesting because they talked about how he had a couple different jobs, a couple different hotels, and compared and contrasted the infinite-minded versus finite-minded approach between those different organizations. That really hit me. And again, I don't think I have anything specific that like I'm doing this right now and I need to change it, but I've definitely done it in the past, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Solutions to ethical fading are usually finite in nature, which then leads to more ethical fading. So the best solution when it comes to this ethical fading is just don't even start. Don't even go there. Because ethical decisions are not based on what's best in the short term. Usually, when you have a situation like a Wells Fargo or some big corporate scandal, the focus is on, well, how do we fix this? And naturally, it's going to be short term. And it's kind of shocking as you read through these chapters to recognize that if you were to get caught doing something like that, and then you ask yourself, how can I fix this? Whatever answer you're going to come up with is going to be wrong because your perspective is wrong. Like it's more complicated than that. And really you just have to go back and start at the beginning with a infinite mindset and a just cause.
I think this is where like the concept of habits comes in pretty strong, and how I've been watching a couple interviews of James Clear lately, and it kind of has me wanting to reread Atomic Habits over Christmas break. But I've become more and more aware of how like his thinking around habit building is essentially lifestyle building, just not called that. You're just thinking about the individual components of what you do on a day-to-day basis and how you live your life on a day-to-day basis, and how those little tiny incremental steps can add up to massive change and massive results. I think that is ultimately what can help protect against some of this ethical fading and the lazy leadership. Because me, for one, I'm very prone to the whole instant gratification circle of procrastination. It just can eat me alive if I'm not careful. And I have to continue to build habits to stop that. Otherwise, like you're saying, ethical fading can creep up on you and you don't even realize it's happening. It's so hard to get the high level review or the reflection point you need to even see it. Sometimes you got to have a spouse or somebody just slap you across the face and say, hey, you're screwing this up, in order to actually get the point across. So the hope is you don't ever go down that path. The reality is you're probably going to lean towards it at some point. So trying to put together something to help with that in the long term would be helpful.
Ethical fading is not a single wicked act done by evil people. It's something that anybody is susceptible to.
Absolutely. Now, to kind of transition off of that, he talks about these other companies or other people that he terms worthy rivals. And worthy rivals, think of them as not necessarily your competition, but somebody or some company that is working in the same space that you are. And it's important to identify them, because knowing who those rivals are helps you identify your own weaknesses, because you can start to see their strengths and how they do things.
Mm-hmm.
And it can help illuminate some of what you're doing as well. You may not like them. You may absolutely despise them. But you have to at least recognize and respect them for what they are doing. He tells the story early on about how
I love this story.
Yeah, he didn't name the person, did he? I tried to find it.
He did eventually.
Okay, I drew a blank and missed that part. You'll have to tell who it is when we're done here. But he tells the story of how there's another individual who was working in the same space as he was, as far as like writing books and creating things. And he would constantly check in to see, was his book rated higher than this other guy's book? Or was it the other way around? And if he was losing, he would just loathe and be upset about all the things that this other guy was doing and was jealous, et cetera, et cetera. And whenever he was winning, he would kind of gloat, like, "Oh yeah, look at me," beat his chest and be all excited about it. But then he was asked to do a joint interview with this guy. So they were on the stage at the same time, and they were asked to introduce each other. And if you've ever been to conferences or anything along those lines, these public interviews, the introduction is basically talking about the accolades of the other person and how great they are, and trying to explain to the audience, why they should be listening to that particular person. And Simon had the opportunity to go first in this instance, and I'm just gonna read what he says, because he starts this particular segment. So whenever he goes to introduce his rival, this is what he says: "You make me unbelievably insecure because all of your strengths are all my weaknesses. You can do so well the things that I really struggle to do." The audience laughed. He looked at me and responded, "The insecurity is mutual." And he went on to identify some of my strengths as areas in which he wished he could improve. That right there is, like, one, just true humanity in practice. Like, that's just awesome, for one.
Mm-hmm.
But two, it shows the power of rivals, in that they do show you what it is you're doing well and what it is you need to improve on. And then can encourage you to continually improve yourself. Okay, now I'm dying because I completely forgot who was the person.
It was Adam Grant.
Adam Grant. Okay, how did I miss that? Got it. Okay.
Well, the way he wrote it was interesting because he is very generic about the person the whole time, and then he kind of just slips it in under the radar near the end as like a big reveal. I kind of feel like if you were to see him read this chapter out loud, there would be a big buildup to that reveal. But when it's just text on a page, it's kind of like, oh yeah, by the way, it was Adam Grant.
Sure. Wow, I just completely missed it.
So maybe some of the effect is lost there, but that was definitely a cool story. I love this chapter because at the beginning he's talking about it, and you're like, I got to know who that person is. And then,
but then he doesn't tell you. Like, he goes through that. I was just flipping back through it, obviously, because I was there reading it. It's like, he doesn't tell. He goes on to explain the worthy rivals thing, and then comes back to it. That's why I missed it, because I got angry because he didn't tell me, and then I blocked it out.
Yeah, exactly. The worthy rivals. This is a really cool section, I thought, because, like you said, the worthy rival could be anybody. It could be somebody that you really like. It could be somebody that you really hate. But how you view the people who are also players in the game in whatever space you happen to be in, I feel like this is something that's easily to slip into a finite mindset. And he makes the point that the finite mindset for book authors is stupid, because can people read more than one book? Of course they can. We read 20 something of them this year.
Right.
So just because they bought Adam Grant's book doesn't mean that they're not going to buy his book. And that's kind of the default approach that we take, is like, oh, well, they chose this other person, so they obviously aren't going to choose me also. And I think that's fairly natural. And in some games, that is true. Some arenas, that is true. But it doesn't have to be true. And he explains that in an infinite game, both you and your worthy rival can be successful. I really like this. I've been studying this for quite some time, this abundance versus scarcity mindset. And I never made the connection between finite and infinite, but it totally makes sense, where an infinite mindset is an abundance mindset and a finite mindset is a scarcity mindset. And what does that mean? It means that a scarcity mindset thinks that there's only so much success to go around. And it's easy to see with a finite mindset and with that scarcity mindset, the approach of Steve Ballmer-led Microsoft, where we've got to beat Apple because this pie is only so big and we got to get our share. But that isn't the case most of the time. And this is, I think, hard for us as humans to understand, that the abundance mindset, just because somebody else is successful, like that's not taking anything away from us. In fact, that may actually be a help to us, because if somebody likes Adam Grant's book and we talk about the same stuff, maybe there's a good chance they were at this event, they saw us on the same stage, they're going to come and buy my book too. You know, when you identify your worthy rivals, it's not as somebody that you're trying to beat necessarily. How does he put it? He says that if you're playing an infinite game, other players are not competitors to be beaten, but they are rivals which make you a better player. So it also doesn't matter if your rival is playing with a finite or infinite mindset, as long as you are playing with an infinite mindset. So that's an interesting scenario, I think, where if you are competing with somebody and they do have a finite mindset, where you can kind of let them set the tone and slip into that, but it's not the best way to do things. Competitors compete for customers. He says rivals look for followers, and recognizing that there's no shortage of the followers that you can attract to a just cause. Just because somebody else has attracted some followers doesn't mean that there are less of them out there for you.
I want to pull in the last section here, the courage to lead, because I've been itching to talk about this whole CVS story, and we brought it up a couple of times, but I feel like this is a good place to kind of morph the end of this book together, because with worthy rivals, sometimes you have companies that are willing to have courage and take that step towards something that no one else is being willing to take that step forward in. With CVS, it was cigarettes and nicotine. Like, you know, they're out to help us be healthy. That's not helpful by selling cigarettes. Is it a big plus to their bottom line? Absolutely. But they had the courage to step forward and then remove that from their sales. And by doing so, if their rivals are paying attention, they can now see that weakness in themselves. So take, for example, if Walgreens is watching CVS and those two are rivals, it's now on Walgreens' shoulders to do something similar, or to consider their own just cause, and if they're actually shooting towards it, because have they done something at that level when CVS just did it? So if you have the courage to take those steps and to follow your just cause and to do something that no one else is doing, if you have rivals and you've identified your rivals, like that might become your strength, but what are your rivals having the courage to lead in? And are you falling behind is the bad term there, because that's a finite mentality, but are you shortcutting your own just cause because you're not doing the same? So knowing who your rivals are and seeing what they're doing can help you see where you need to improve as well. I don't know if I want to take this action item, but it's an interesting action item if any of our listeners would like to take it, to identify who your worthy rivals are. I feel like I should do this, but I most certainly don't feel comfortable identifying them publicly, most likely, because a lot of the stuff I tend to do is very, it's a lot of writing and very personal in that sense. So I would be identifying a person, not a company. Like, I don't feel like I would have an issue identifying a company, but identifying a person and talking about them on air, that seems a little odd. So don't expect that one, Mike. But it's an interesting question of, should you identify your worthy rivals when you're operating in a personal space of sorts? I don't know. Probably, but not something I would share publicly.
Yeah, that is interesting. I'm not sure I want to apply that either. Although before we hit record, we were talking and you asked me off air, are we worthy rivals? And I said that I think in an alternate universe, probably. But I still think that you could make that argument, but it's not a direct competition necessarily. Like, if I'm writing on task management at the Sweet Setup and you are creating a task management OmniFocus course, technically, I guess you could view us as rivals, but also I think that we've both kind of had this infinite mindset as it pertains to the productivity space specifically for a long time. And so I don't typically view you that way, or anybody else who would come out with a course or write a book that way, that there's enough room here for everybody. I do think it's worth identifying if you want to pick somebody who kind of challenges you to do better. He makes the point in the previous section, knowing who your worthy rivals are is the best way to adapt and improve before it's too late. So you can learn from what other people are doing. But to your point about CVS and Walgreens, it was interesting as he talks about that in the last chapter here, that's not what happened. He shares how Walgreens has a similar statement that they use, but then when asked about the fact that they continued to sell cigarettes, they justified it with a statement that basically said, well, it's our legal right to do this. And that kind of goes back to the ethical fading thing. If you find yourself trying to justify something legally, like I can do this, then you probably have disconnected from your just cause. And I think that when you see somebody who has a just cause in a particular area like CVS, and they make a statement or they make a decision that's in line with that just cause, like deciding to stop selling cigarettes in their stores, it almost doesn't matter what somebody else is doing if you're Walgreens or whoever the other pharmacies are. I don't even know. They're gonna do what they're gonna do depending on the mindset that they have as they're playing the game. And if you've got a finite mindset, then you are always going to be looking at the short term, and you're never going to make those big, bold leaps like CVS did. And ultimately, we talked about how that turned out better for them. The previous chapter on the existential flexibility kind of talks about this too. We covered, what was that? The Innovator's Dilemma. And they talked about Kodak. Well, Kodak appears here again. And they invented the digital camera. Existential flexibility is being able to see the next big thing for your just cause and being able to kill the thing that you were doing and go over to the new thing. The Kodak story was interesting to me because when they started, their cause was you press the button, we do the rest. They wanted people to be able to take photographs without having a professional photographer there to take it. And it's interesting. He makes the point in the book that as they abandoned the digital photography, even though they had the patents on it, once the patents dried up in 2007, the money dried up. And ironically, the one market that Kodak had left when he wrote this, I'm not even sure if this is true anymore, is professional photographers. So they went full circle, and they totally forgot who they were trying to serve. He also talks in this section about Disney and how they released Snow White, and it was a successful animation. And then Walt's like, I got to build the happiest place on earth. I got to build Disneyland. And everybody's like, you're crazy. He's like, no, this is going to be awesome. I think that the courage to lead ties in with this previous chapter very nicely, where there will be points as a leader where you see what leap you have to make. And the finite-minded solution is always going to be to cling to what you know. The infinite-minded solution is going to leap into the unknown and see what's actually there. And it's easy to talk about that on a podcast and say, oh yeah, when you see those opportunities, just go for it. But it's totally different when you're there and you've got people who are relying on you. And I'd like to think that I have, after reading this book specifically, would have the courage to say, I don't know what's next, but I know that it's this direction, and to step out there. But time will tell, I guess. You know, when the rubber hits the road, that's when you really find out what you're made out of. But the more that you can connect to your just cause, and the more firmly you can attach to it, he talks in this section about integrity, firm adherence to a code of especially moral or artistic values, incorruptible, that can put you in a position where you are more likely to succeed and navigate that successfully.
I really don't know what else to add to that. Do you have more to add to the book, or should we do action items?
No, there are a couple quotes I'll just add. Page 217, right near the end, he says, playing the infinite game is not a checklist, it's a mindset. It's not something that you can just check the boxes and like, there, now I'm infinite minded. There is no formula for an infinite mindset. And then he also says on the page 218, which I think is the second to last page, courageous leaders are strong because they know that they don't have all the answers and they don't have total control. They do, however, have each other, and they have a just cause to guide them. I'd like to think that that applies to Bookworm, and I think you could apply that if you want to whatever organization you happen to be in. But inherent in that statement is the requirement that you admit that you don't know everything. And it's kind of interesting to me that some organizations, if you were to say, yeah, I don't have all the answers, they'll be like, hey, that's great. You're admitting it, and we know that we can work with this and we can go in the right direction. And other organizations, if you say you don't know all the answers, it is a negative thing and you're not going to last long. Ultimately, I think an infinite-minded view or perspective of that would be, well, good, I shouldn't have been there in the first place. But I don't know. It's a great ending to the book, I think, and a great encouragement to launch yourself into a infinite mindset.
Absolutely. Well, I have one action item that I'm going to write down because I'm not comfortable writing down the second one, in that I just want to define what my just cause is personally. I like having the mission statement tied to the church, but I don't think that's quite specific enough for me. So I need to work on that one. That's probably something I could share, so I'll write that one down. But that's what I got, Mike, because I feel like that's the starting point for the rest of this. There's so many other aspects that are going to come out of that, but I feel like that's the starting point.
Sure. Well, I've got two that I've mentioned, and that's basically it. I'm trying to decide if I want to put these down formally, but since I talked to them about them already, first one, identify what is my just cause. I want to spend some time thinking about that and see if I can come up with a single sentence there. And then the other one, which I'm not sure I want to share this, but I do want to think about, how do I create that circle of safety for my kids so that trust exists in our family. Our kids are getting a little bit older. Toby is almost 13, and that is kind of scary to me. Teenagers are typically the point when people say like, oh, all of a sudden they just don't care about what you have to say. They just stop listening to you. And I don't want that to happen. But I also recognize that I've got to sow before we get to that point. And I've been doing that, I believe, with like the one-on-ones that we do. But I want to continue to think about this and see if there's anything else that I can do to create that circle of safety where my kids feel like they can talk to me about anything as they get older and they're dealing with more serious life issues. You know, I want to not just be the person with all the answers, you know, finite-minded leader who's like, this is what you got to do, but I want to be the person who is willing to listen and to help them solve their problems.
I think that's a really noble thing to take on and a very tall task, Mike. Good luck.
Yep, I know that. It makes me nervous stating it publicly. But yeah, what's the alternative? You know,
it's true.
Just not do it. That's not great.
Fair enough. All right. Well, style and rating. It's Simon Sinek. Like it's easy to read, and he is very good at telling stories with words on a page, and it's an easy one to sit down and get lost in. I felt I read it fairly quickly and really enjoyed going through it. So it's one that I would recommend. You know, it's one that I think is extremely helpful if you have any qualms with, you know, do you have a direction in your life? Do you feel like you've got a good handle on where you should be going, which is probably, you know, we didn't plan this out at all. You know, we don't typically look further than the next two books as far as the schedule for Bookworm, but this turned out to be an excellent one to read here towards the end of the year, I feel, because, you know, with the new year coming, like it's a very good one to have under your belt, because it's one that can kind of set you up for determining what is that goal. Not goal. I keep using that word. What is your just cause? What is it you're shooting for? So I really appreciated having gone through it at this time, and am glad to have gone through it. As far as how to rate it, um, I I don't. I know. I feel like we've done this a lot lately. Like, it's not. I don't know that this is a 5.0. To me, I don't know why though. Like, it's one of these that I got a lot out of, but something about it just doesn't strike me as 5.0. I know it's at least 4.5. But I don't feel like I can go all the way to 5.0. I don't know why that is though. I wish I could nail that down. It might just be that, like, this will sound a little weird. This is a very skimmable book. I felt that, like, it's not one that, like, take Range, for example. Like, that one you really had to just sit and read. Like, it's not one that you could just jump around and jump ahead, come back. Like, you can't do that. It builds on itself through the entirety of the 280 pages that are in it. Like, that book, you can't do that with. This one, you definitely can. I don't know if that's why I struggle going all the way to the 5.0. Because there are definitely other books that are like that are 5.0s. I don't know. This is kind of a weird one for me. Maybe it's because it wasn't 100% my pick. I don't know. I'm going to put it at 4.5. I'm not 100% sure why, though. This is so weird. All right, I need to be done. I'm going to put it at 4.5.
Well, I think the reason that you are not putting it at a 5.0 is because you are not Walmart, you are not Ford, you are not CVS, you are not Apple, you are not Microsoft. It's hard for people like us to put ourselves in the shoes of a Alan Mulally or a Steve Jobs or a Sam Walton. So, in my opinion, this book is a little bit difficult to translate, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But the information in it is really, really, really good. And it is typical Simon Sinek. It is very well written, great stories. He was a little bit more snarky in this one than I thought the previous books that we've read by him were, which I actually enjoyed. There were a couple lines where he's like, so people will typically say this, and then he's kind of sarcastic. He's like, well, what's the point? And I actually really enjoyed that. I also am going to meet you, though, at 4.5, because I feel like from a bookworm perspective, if you are in the right position, then Simon Sinek is just what the doctor ordered. But for anybody who's not over a large team or organization, that there are probably other books written by other people who speak more directly to the things that you are going through. There's tons of great stuff in here, tons of things that we didn't even talk about that really impacted me. It's a pretty short book. Well, it's 200 something pages, so it's not that short, but it's an easy read. It's not something that you have to labor through, and it took me weeks to get through. I feel like he does a great job of taking these complex topics and subjects and making them approachable. He gets into economics and definitions of capitalism. I felt like I actually understood what he was talking about as he's introducing us to Adam Smith, and I'm blanking on the other guy's name, but the guy who kind of changed the definition of capitalism and how he uses that to launch into all the examples of corporations and businesses who are kind of applying this in his view the wrong way. I feel like Simon Sinek and Adam Grant, once he shared that they're worthy rivals, I can totally see how these guys are talking about some of the same things, but maybe different sides of the same coin. And I think it's probably a matter of personal preference whether this is a 5-star book or not. But it isn't something that I would just recommend to anybody off the street just because of the approach that he takes. There are a lot of corporate stories, a lot of stories about Apple specifically, and I can think of a couple people in particular where as soon as they start this book and they get to the part about Microsoft versus Apple, they're going to disconnect. So I do think it's a great book. I'm really glad that we read it, and it makes me want to read more Simon Sinek. But I think from a bookworm perspective, this is a 4.5 that could easily be justified as a 5.
Thanks for justifying me. I appreciate that. So let's put Simon on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
The next book is Indistractable by Nir Eyal, the guy who wrote Hooked. Kind of interesting because that book was how to make habit-forming products, and this one is basically how to fight against that from a user perspective. So be interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited about going through this one. It'll be good. Following that, I kind of struggled to pick this one, but I really want to read this one with you. Making It All Work by David Allen. This is going to take us back all the way to episode number 1 of Bookworm, which maybe there's a different time to do this, but I really want to do this. It's the follow-up to Getting Things Done, if I understand it correctly. I've never read this, Mike. Have you read this before?
I have not.
Okay, so this will be interesting. I'm not 100% certain what we're getting into, but I've wanted to read this for a long time.
You know, I have opinions on David Allen.
I know you do.
This will be a fun episode, one way or the other.
That didn't weigh into my decision at all. So I'm excited. I think we'll go through it.
I'm either going to be fired up or eating humble pie.
One of those two. So it'll be a good one. I do not have a Gap book this time around. That whole Simple Life thing, gonna get there. But you have one, and I know you have a story with it.
I do. Yeah. We got a puppy, a golden doodle puppy named Lucy. And my Gap book is The Perfect Puppy by Gwen Bailey. This is a book that I had on my bookshelf at one point. We got it when we got our previous dog, and then I loaned it to somebody and never got it back. So we've got a new puppy. We want to make sure that we are creating not a monster with unintentionally bad habits, So I remember when I read through this the first time that it really helped, and I want to go through it again because I feel like this is the thing we need. As we got this 3-month-old golden doodle puppy in our house, we need to make sure that we do it right from the beginning and don't try to change things after the fact. So that's what I'm going to be going over as we're on Christmas break.
Nice. How to take care of your puppy. Love it. Oh, welcome, Lucy. Just a quick reminder, go to club.bookworm.fm. Top of the list, there should be poll. Top books of 2019. Go get your vote in. Go do that now. We would love to know, what you feel are the best books that we covered for 2019, and we'll talk about them in some format. So while you're there, club.bookworm.fm, go to /membership, and you can support the show through that. You get access to all of Mike's book notes, his MindNode files. There's a handful of Gap book episodes I've recorded in the past. I haven't had Gap books for a little while, so there are none for new ones, but there are some old backlog there. And there's some special stuff like a really cool wallpaper for your computer. So I love that thing. It's what I use on everything I can possibly put it on, including computers that aren't mine. So anyway, go to club.bookworm.fm. All kinds of goodies there. Get your vote in.
Awesome. And if you're reading along with us, pick up Indistractable by Nir Eyal, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.